I want to open up first by showing you this shirt because let's see, are you there,
Yes.
God? It's
Yeah.
me, you.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. Right.
We talked once before about how American evangelicals somehow conflate Jesus
Yes.
and Jehovah.
Yeah.
There's another thing I wanted to bring up too. I wanted to kind of open up with this. You have a seminar, and let's just start talking about that. I mean, you have a seminar coming up where you're talking about virgin births. Can you tell me what that's about?
Yeah. It's called Other Virgin Births in Antiquity. And it's dealing with the question of whether the stories about Jesus being born of a virgin in the New Testament are replications of what you get in other cultures at the time. And so in the New Testament, Jesus is born of a virgin in both Matthew and Luke. It's the only two places, but his mother's a virgin. She's never had sex, and yet she gets pregnant. And in the Greek and Roman worlds, you have a number of stories of people who are born when a god gets a woman pregnant. And so I'm going to talk about these other stories to see how they're similar and different from those of Jesus. They include figures that people will know about. Romulus, the founder of Rome, or Hercules, or Alexander the Great. They allegedly have a divine father and a mortal mother. But I'm going to ask also, is it the case in any of these instances that the woman is actually a virgin? And if she is a virgin, then are Christians just ripping off the theme? If she's not a virgin, are Christians doing something essentially different? And so those are the kinds of issues I'll be talking about.
You didn't know you were pregnant?
I'm a virgin. So's my fiance.
I believe him.
Yeah. So the first way that this question comes up is in reference to something that Justin Martyr said. He was one of the early church fathers in the 2nd century when he said, when we say that the Word, who is the firstborn of God, was produced without sexual union, and that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified and died, rose again, and descended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those whom you esteem to be the sons of Jupiter. And that tells me that there are sons of Jupiter who, and there's two parts to this. There are sons of Jupiter, he implies, that were born of virgins or had a virgin birth and were also crucified. Is he referring to documents we no longer have access to that you know of?
So it's a very important passage in Justin, and it's a key. Justin is the first real intellectual who converts to Christianity that we know of, the first intellectual writer, depending on whether you rate Paul as an intellectual or not. But so Justin's writing around the year 150, and he's the first surviving lengthy apologist we have, or someone who's defending the Christian faith against the charges of other intellectuals. And so it's important to put him in his context and to understand what he's saying within his own specific context. Justin actually doesn't believe that there are other beings that are exactly like Jesus. He says that there, but when you actually read his entire text, it's clear he doesn't think they're exactly like Jesus. What he's saying there is, you are persecuting us for believing in a being that's pretty much like the people you worship. And so, like, why are you persecuting us? Jesus is like these other guys. And so it's like that. It isn't that he's saying, because when you actually read how he explicates all that, it's clear he's not talking about people who, and so he's not actually indicating there that there are other people who were born of a virgin.
I feel like I've asked you this before, but it might have been because, as I mentioned to you before, I've taken a class that was based on your collective works, and I was thinking about the other crucified Christs and the poor sources like Kersey Graves, who put out some misleading information on that. So I just wanted to know, whether there were these other crucified Christ characters, and obviously there were other claims to virgin births. I remember, let's see, there's several supposedly virgin births, or at least miraculous births, like the one of Buddha being born out of his mother's side and so on. And are there at least more than a handful, maybe more than a dozen or so that we can verify? Because the sources we have today may not be reliable, as I mentioned, Kersey Graves. But do you know of at least a handful or a dozen or so different references in different cultures or what have you for God's heroes, kings, and so forth that were popularly believed to have been born of virgins. That can be historically verified that belief did exist once upon a time.
That's going to be the question that I raise. And I'm not going to give you the answer right now because, in fact, I think it's a bona fide question. So people say this. If you go on the internet, you will see people, person after person, claiming that you have all these virgin births. The question I'm doing this, so it's absolutely true that people, you have accounts of people who has a divine father and an immortal mother. So God is literally the father. My question in this seminar is, are any of these women virgins? In other words, are they women who've never had sex? Right, that people assume that if a God is the father, that the woman's a virgin, and why would somebody assume that, for example?
Well,
So
I think I have an answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was another study. There was a 2013 article that I read on the statistics of human parthenogenesis, wherein a total of 45 women in this vast study, there were 45 that they narrowed down that claimed to have become pregnant without engaging in sexual activity. And this is where the statistics get more amusing. At least they didn't engage in sexual activity with a male partner. 60% of the children born of these asexual pregnancies were reportedly were boys, despite that being impossible for humans. I mean, Komodo dragons can produce males parthenogenetically, but that's because reptilian chromosomes are quite different than mammals like us. If a human were to have a parthenogenetic birth, it would have to be female to female, but I guess no Middle Eastern culture wants to worship Jessica Christ. Researchers in the study noted the probability of asexual pregnancy increased among young women who had previously signed formal vows of chastity before their deeply religious parents. And the researchers noted that in a majority of these cases, there was a possibility that the so-called virgins might have been mistaken about the extent or percentage of whatever virginity they actually still maintained.
You're not a virgin, are you? No? No, what do you mean, no? Well, Steve, but he doesn't count! Doesn't count!
I find it interesting that, like whoever wrote Matthew didn't apparently understand Isaiah 7, because that was a completely different prophecy. And as I understand it, again, the word used to describe virgin at the time simply meant like young maiden or whatever. It was Alma, not Bethulah. And I'm sure I'm not pronouncing those right. I've only ever seen them written. And then later the context kind of changes. If she's a young maiden, then she's of course unmarried and therefore assumed to be unsexed. And so there's just a conflation later about that. And then later on, somebody has another context on it and decides that that now meant virgin, where it means virgin now. So that's what it must have meant then. And clearly was not the case. And so Matthew I guess they just have this tradition, or maybe that was already a precedent by other religions. So they add or create this mythology of the virgin birth.
Yeah, so it is a question whether Matthew came up with this or somebody before him. But Matthew is quoting Isaiah 7:14, and he's not quoting it in the Hebrew. The Hebrew is clear. It says that a young woman has conceived and she will bear a son. So Isaiah, if you actually read it in its context, Isaiah is talking about a woman who's probably standing there in front of them and saying, look, this woman's pregnant. And by the time her child is old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, by that time, these kings who are threatening our kingdom will be disappeared. It's a prophecy about how the king of Israel doesn't have to be afraid of Jerusalem being wiped out, because soon, and so what happened is the word is Alma, and it doesn't mean virgin. It can. The woman could be a virgin, just like if you say today, I saw Miss Smith at the store. That means she's a virgin, right? Because you use the word Miss. No, it just means she could be a virgin. I don't know, but it just means. And so the Hebrew word Bethula does mean virgin, and that's not the word used. When it gets translated into Greek by the Greek translators, they use the word Parthenos, which is a word that could also mean young maiden, but also frequently meant a woman who'd never had sex. And Matthew picks up on that and thinks it means a woman who's never had sex. And his account then is about how a woman never had sex as a baby. And so it's basically, it is based on a misunderstanding of Isaiah.
Not that it's any of your business, Mr. National Enquirer, but I had the pleasure of spending a quiet evening in the company of Connie Swale.
Wait a minute. Connie Swale? Don't you mean the Virgin Connie Swale?
It is never wise to believe anything said by another without reservation, without question, without reason. Otherwise, you'd be fooled into believing anything. For example, here are some of the claims found in similar pamphlets distributed in another country outside of our familiar mythos. Our dear, faultless, and gifted supreme leader, our Father, the central brain sent from heaven, and son of the eternal president, was born in a log cabin on a sacred mountain. His birth was foretold by a swallow and heralded by a double rainbow. At the moment of his birth, winter instantly changed into spring, and a new star appeared in the heavens. News of his birth was carved into trees and soon written into rocks all across the country. He never had the need to urinate or defecate, and the weather behaved according to his mood. Even in his infancy, he was already a genius. He learned to walk in just 3 weeks and talk at 8 weeks. As a schoolboy, he corrected and chastised his teachers for their incorrect interpretations of history. While at university, he wrote 1,500 books and composed 6 operas, all of which are better than any in the history of music. The first time he went bowling, he scored a perfect score of 300. The first time he picked up a golf club, he played one round that was 38 under par with 11 holes in one. It was the greatest golf game ever, so he retired from the game. He had great success at everything he did. He invented the hamburger. Look how popular that was. Not only was he an accomplished engineer, an invincible military master, and a communications expert who could coach winning soccer teams using an invisible transmitter, he was also an unprecedented director, composer, and choreographer, as well as a fashion icon whose trend-setting style was in vogue the world over. He was a great champion of justice and peace, and his diplomatic skill made him the envy of everyone. On the tragic day when our illustrious commander, born of heaven, the lodestar of the century, the Generalissimo, died, the skies glowed red above the sacred mountain, and an impenetrable sheet of ice in the heart of the mystic volcano cracked with a deafening roar. And a crane, the symbol of longevity, was seen circling for hours around the statue of the eternal president before flying off to the capital city. There, thousands of mourners gathered for hours, convulsing in unison, all of them overcome by inconsolable grief. And what I just read to you is not the questionable testimony of anonymous authors thousands of years ago and decades after the fact, talking about some guy with no historic record who evidently never even existed. Some of what I'm talking about was actually televised in living memory. It was reported on the news by the Korean Central News Agency and detailed in the official biography of Kim Jong-il. I'm not kidding. Look it up. And get this. We can prove that Kim Jong-il was a real person. Look at the concordant documentation. We're talking about national news, official historic records, and recent events you can watch on YouTube right now. That's much more proof than there ever was for Jesus. So if that doesn't convince you to believe in the powers of Kim Jong-il, then how could you possibly expect me to believe your ancient fables of talking snakes and golems?